The scorched hull of forward base Delta 7 loomed against the starscape like a tarnished medal of honor. Commander Zalri Then watched it grow through the transport's viewport, 4 of his 6 eyes narrowing at the sight. 20 years of war had transformed what was once a pristine scientific outpost into a patchwork monstrosity of retrofit armor plating and weapon emplacements, a fitting guardian for the edge of what Coalition forces now called Nightmare Sector. Zari's carapace plates shifted uncomfortably as the transport docked with a mechanical groan. His assignment here was straightforward: observe, report, analyze. After 15 cycles on the front lines against the Devourers, Command had finally recognized his tactical expertise was better utilized studying battle patterns than participating in them. The reassignment should have felt like a reprieve. Instead, as he gathered his meager belongings, Zalri felt an inexplicable dread creeping along his dorsal ridge. The docking bay bustled with the usual chaos of a forward operations base. Coalition flags hung overhead, the amber sunburst of the Vorthon Republic prominent among them, alongside dozens of other member species. Holographic battle maps pulsed with real-time updates from the front, casting eerie blue and red shadows across the faces of personnel rushing to their stations. A flash of movement caught Zalri's attention, a figure moving with the distinctive gait of a species he'd encountered only in training simulations. Human, shorter than a Vorthon, with only 2 eyes and peculiar flat teeth visible when they spoke. This one approached with purposeful strides. Uniform crisp, despite the station's recycled air that carried the metallic tang of ozone and desperation. "Commander Then?" The human extended a hand, some cultural greeting gesture. "Captain Mara Hayes, Human Liaison Officer. Welcome to the Edge of Hell." Zalri executed the appropriate return gesture, careful to modulate his grip strength for the fragile human skeletal structure. "Your reputation precedes you, Captain. I've studied the preliminary reports from the human contingent." Hayes's face creased in what Zari recognized as a smile, though it held none of the warmth the expression was supposed to convey. "Reports never tell the whole story, Commander, especially not about us." As Hayes led him toward the command center, Zalri overheard fragments of conversation that immediately sharpened his attention. "Third Human Flotilla arrived yesterday. Command's sending them straight to Sector 9 Alpha. Outdated vessels, minimal support systems. Suicide mission, if you ask me." Zalri's antennae twitched. The Vorthan military doctrine prioritized survival and strategic withdrawal over Pyrrhic victories. Sending inexperienced forces into the heart of Nightmare Sector defied logical military planning. Yet here was evidence of exactly that: the Coalition deploying its newest member species to the deadliest front. "The humans volunteered," Hayes said quietly, noticing his attention. "For Sector 9 Alpha specifically. That sector has claimed 7 battle groups in the past cycle alone." Zalri replied, unable to keep the disbelief from his harmonics. Hayes's face hardened. "Precisely why we requested it." The command center of Delta 7 hummed with tense energy. Officers from a dozen species hunched over consoles, their physiologies adapted to different atmospheric conditions and gravity wells, united only by the universal translator nodes at their throats and the common enemy beyond the station walls. General Vor, a massive Calarian with chitinous armor that made Zalri's own exoskeleton seem fragile by comparison, nodded curtly as they entered. "Commander, Then, your timing is fortuitous. We're about to begin the strategic assessment." The holotable flared to life, projecting a 3-dimensional map of Nightmare Sector. Red markers clustered densely around several star systems, Devourer strongholds. Blue and green indicators showed Coalition forces, spread thin like a fragile net cast against an ocean predator. "Casualty report," barked Admiral Fenn, her translucent Aquilian membranes fluttering with barely contained tension. A junior officer stepped forward. "Coalition losses at 63% across all theaters. Breakdown by species." The figures scrolled by, each representing thousands of lives extinguished across the void. Zalri recorded them in his datapad with the detached precision of a career soldier, until one entry caused his stylus to pause mid-stroke. "Human forces, 89% casualties." The number hung in the air, absurd in its magnitude. 89% losses would have triggered an immediate withdrawal for any other species. Any sane military command would have pulled back, reassessed, preserved what remained of their fighting force. Zalri glanced at Hayes. Her expression revealed nothing. Yet they've secured 7 strategic objectives. The officer continued, including the Thessia jump node and the Caraxes supply lines. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Zalri noticed several officers exchanging looks that ranged from skepticism to outright disdain. Luck, scoffed a Medusan commander, silver scales rippling with derision. Or creative accounting? Neither, Hayes replied evenly. Simply human determination. Zalri found himself making additional notes in the margins of his datapad. Asterisk investigate casualty to objective ratios. Verify tactical doctrine. Psychological evaluation of command structure. The briefing continued, but Zalri's mind had already shifted to his assignment parameters. He had expected to observe battlefield tactics and weapon efficacy. Instead, he found himself confronted with a far more unsettling question. What manner of species would accept such losses as a matter of course? When the briefing concluded, Zalri approached Hayes. I require direct observation of human forces in combat conditions. She nodded as if she'd been expecting the request. The U.S. Valor departs for the front in 6 hours. I've already arranged your berth. Zalri's sensory spines tingled with warning. The preliminary data suggests I should observe from a distance, perhaps through drone telemetry or... You won't understand us that way, Commander. Hayes's voice dropped to a near whisper. You need to see it up close, smell it, feel it. Otherwise, your report to the Coalition will be worse than useless. It will be misleading. 6 hours later, Zalri stood in the transport bay of the U.S. Valor, a destroyer that had clearly seen better days. Scorch marks scarred its hull plating, and makeshift repairs patched what must have been catastrophic breaches not long ago. The vessel should have been decommissioned, sent to a shipyard for proper overhaul or scrapped entirely. Instead, it was heading back into the fray, carrying nearly 1,000 human souls toward almost certain death. More disturbing than the ship's condition was the crew's demeanor. As Zalri made his way through the cramped corridors, he observed humans welding patches, rerouting power conduits, and calibrating weapon systems, all while laughing, sharing jokes, or singing what his translator identified as patriotic songs about Earth, their homeworld. Don't mind the racket, said Lieutenant Casson, a broad-shouldered boarding officer who had been assigned as Zalri's guide. Singing keeps the mind occupied when the hands are busy. You seem as unconcerned about the ship's structural integrity, Zalri observed. Casson shrugged. She'll hold together long enough. Long enough for what? To do what needs doing. Casson gestured toward a viewport where distant explosions silently blossomed against the black. Out there. It's not about coming home. It's about making sure the devourers don't reach home. The casual fatalism in the statement violated everything Zalri understood about military psychology. In the Vorthon Republic, soldiers fought fiercely but prudently, with self-preservation balanced against strategic objectives. Suicide missions were rare, authorized only when the mathematical calculus of lives saved versus lives lost overwhelmingly favored the sacrifice. Your boarding teams, Zalri said, consulting his datapad. They've conducted 17 operations in the past Earth month. Return rate of 26%. Casson's face hardened. 27% now. We got lucky on Proxima Station. Yet you continue to volunteer for these missions. Someone has to board those living ships and plant the charges in the nerve centers. Casson's eyes took on a distant quality. Drones don't work. The biofields fry their circuits. Remote detonations get absorbed by those cellular walls. Has to be boots on the ground, charges placed by hand. At such cost? Worth every drop of blood. Casson's certainty was absolute. The Devourers consumed 3 colony worlds before we joined the Coalition. 12 billion human lives. They didn't just kill them, they processed them, rendered them down for biological components. His voice dropped to a whisper. We found recording devices on the last world. Heard what it sounded like. Zalri felt his plates tighten involuntarily. He had seen the aftermath of Devourer harvesting operations, the liquefaction centers, the processing vats. But he had never heard the sounds, never wanted to. So we board their ships, Casson continued. We plant charges in their neural ganglia. Most of us die, but the ship dies too. A grim smile. Fair trade. That night, in the small quarters he'd been assigned, Zalri made his first official log entry. Human military doctrine violates fundamental principles of strategic resource allocation. They expend personnel at rates that would collapse any other coalition military within weeks. Yet their tactics are undeniably effective, especially against Devourer bioships that have proven resistant to conventional assault. The apparent contradiction requires further investigation. More concerning is the psychological component. The humans do not merely accept these losses, they seem to embrace them. Lieutenant Casson spoke of suicide missions with pride. This suggests either a cultural value system radically different from other coalition species, or a level of desperation that has warped their tactical assessment. Either way, their approach violates survival itself, yet it works. The following day, Zalri witnessed his first battle. The Valor joined a small flotilla of 7 human ships against a Devourer scouting force. The enemy vessels resembled massive arthropods, their hulls organic rather than manufactured, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that served as both communication and weapon targeting systems. From the tactical observatory, Zalri watched the human vessels form up in a loose arrowhead formation. The maneuver seemed sound initially, until the lead ship, the UES Defiant, suddenly accelerated to attack velocity. They're positioning for a firing solution, Zalri commented to Hayes, who stood beside him. No, she replied quietly. Watch. The Defiant didn't fire its main batteries. Instead, it continued accelerating, its trajectory aimed directly at the largest Devourer vessel. Zalri's tactical training registered the implications seconds before impact. They're ramming? He couldn't keep the shock from his voice. The Defiant struck the Devourer ship at nearly relativistic speed. The kinetic energy released in the collision tore through the bioship's cellular structure, rupturing its containment membranes. The Devourer vessel convulsed, hemorrhaging internal fluids into the vacuum of space. Mass times acceleration, Hayes said, her eyes fixed on the destruction. Simple physics. Our ships are smaller, but when converted into kinetic weapons... The other human vessels pressed the attack, 2 more sacrificing themselves in ramming maneuvers while the remainder engaged with conventional weapons. When the brief, brutal battle ended, 5 human ships were destroyed or crippled beyond recovery. The Devourer force had been completely annihilated. An acceptable outcome, Hayes stated as damage reports flooded the tactical displays. Zalri struggled to process what he had witnessed. The willingness to sacrifice ships and crews as kinetic projectiles defied conventional military logic, yet the effectiveness was undeniable. Your captain, Zalri said carefully. She gave the ramming order knowing... Captain Chen requested that assignment specifically. Hayes interrupted, along with her entire crew. They volunteered to die. Hayes turned to face him fully. They volunteered to win, Commander. There's a difference. Over the next several days, Zalri immersed himself in human military archives, reviewing battle footage and after-action reports. The pattern repeated across dozens of engagements. Human forces accepting, even embracing, catastrophic losses to secure objectives that other species would have deemed too costly. What emerged was not simply a tactical doctrine, but a philosophy of warfare that prioritized victory at any personal cost. The humans had entered the war late, witnessing the coalition's decade of cautious, measured response that had resulted in a stalemate at best, steady losses at worst. Rather than adopt those same approaches, humanity had introduced a terrible new calculus. Zalri's research was interrupted by an announcement that chilled his hemolymph. The Valor had been assigned to a boarding action against a Devourer command vessel. I want to accompany the boarding party, he told Hayes when she came to brief him. Her expression registered surprise, quickly replaced by wariness. That's not within your assignment parameters, Commander. Observation can be conducted from... I need to understand. Zalri insisted. Not just the tactics, the experience. Hayes studied him for a long moment. You understand the survival probabilities? 27%, as Lieutenant Casson informed me. That was for standard bioships. Her voice was flat. Command vessels are different. We've never had a team return intact. Zalri felt his resolve waver, but he forced his voice to remain steady. Then my observations will be all the more valuable to the Coalition. 12 hours later, Zalri found himself sealed into a human combat suit, modified hastily to accommodate his Vorthon physiology. The armor felt restrictive, claustrophobic, but he knew the alternative was death. The interior of a Devourer ship was hostile to all carbon-based life except their own. The boarding shuttle trembled as it detached from the Valor. Around him, 20 human Marines checked weapons and equipment with mechanical precision. Their faces betrayed no fear, only a focused intensity that Zalri found more unsettling than panic would have been. Target is the secondary heart chamber. Lieutenant Casson briefed them, his voice crackling through the comm system. Bioscans indicate minimal defensive structures. We plant the charges, set the timers, extract if possible. Asterisk if possible. The conditional hung in the air, acknowledged but uncommented upon. For Earth and all humanity, a young Marine said quietly. For Earth and all humanity, the others echoed. The shuttle shuddered violently as it impacted the Devourer vessel. Breach charges detonated, melting through the organic hull. And then they were inside, weapons raised, moving through a nightmarish landscape that defied conventional architecture. The interior of the Devourer ship resembled the digestive tract of some monstrous organism. Walls pulsed with peristaltic movements. Fluids dripped from membranous sacs overhead. The air that hissed through Zalri's filtration system carried the stench of organic acids and putrefaction. Stay in formation, Casson ordered as they advanced. Watch the sealing nodes. They spit paralytic toxins. Zalri observed the Marines navigate the biological horror with practiced efficiency. They moved in pairs, covering angles, marking junction points with phosphorescent tags. When resistance came, in the form of shambling bipedal creatures that might once have been sentient beings before Devourer modification, the Marines dispatched them with controlled bursts of fire. What are those? Zalri asked, mandibles clicking with revulsion as a creature collapsed. Its chest cavity revealing not organs but mechanical components fused with tissue. We call them renders, Casson replied grimly. Captured Coalition soldiers, repurposed. The Devourers aren't big on taking prisoners. The implication twisted in Zalri's mind like a barbed hook. The Coalition had long suspected the Devourers repurposed captured personnel, but seeing the evidence firsthand, that one was Galvadi, a Marine said, kicking over a fallen render to reveal vestigial wings. Poor bastard. Mark it, Casson ordered. Recovery team will try to identify for next of kin. They pressed deeper into the vessel, encountering increasingly dense resistance. Twice they were forced to detour when passages sealed themselves with membranous barriers. The ship was responding to their intrusion, like an immune system fighting infection. Finally, they reached a vast chamber where the walls throbbed with a visible pulse. Massive veins and arteries, or their biological equivalent, converged on a pulsating organ the size of a small transport. Secondary heart. Casson confirmed, checking his scanner. Regulates blood flow to the neural centers. We kill this. We severely impair the ship's cognitive functions. The Marines moved with practiced efficiency, planting explosive charges at key junctures. Zalri found himself assigned to guard duty with a young private who introduced himself as Aaron Tate. First boarding action? Tate asked, eyes constantly scanning for threats. Yes, Zalri admitted, though I've faced Devourers in conventional combat. Tate nodded. Different in here, more personal, somehow. A sudden commotion drew their attention. At the chamber's far side, a section of wall had dilated open, disgorging a wave of renders. The Marines opened fire, but there were too many. The formation began to buckle. Charges are set, Casson shouted over the comm. Fall back to the extraction point. The Marines began a fighting retreat, laying down suppressive fire. Zalri moved to follow, but noticed Tate wasn't withdrawing. We need to go, Zalri insisted. Tate shook his head, unslinging a heavy pack from his shoulders. Timers damaged on the main charge. Someone needs to ensure detonation. With horror, Zalri realized what the Marine intended. That's a manual trigger. You won't survive the blast. Not planning to, Commander. Tate's voice was calm. But the heart dies with me, and that saves the fleet. He paused, then added, Tell them I was present when my name is called. Before Zalri could respond, Cassin's voice cut through the comm. Tate, Commander, move your asses now. Go, Tate said, already positioning himself by the central charge. Tell them what you saw here. Tell them it matters. The retreat became a chaotic blur. Zalri found himself half-dragged by Cassin's Marines, fighting through waves of renders. By the time they reached the extraction shuttle, their number had dwindled to 14. As the shuttle tore away from the Devourer vessel, Zalri watched through a viewport. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a massive explosion tore through the bioship's midsection, followed by secondary ruptures along its length as systems failed catastrophically. Tate, Cassin asked quietly. Zalri could only shake his head. Back aboard the Valor. Zalri retreated to his quarters, mind reeling from what he had witnessed. Private Tate's sacrifice hadn't been impulsive or born of battlefield necessity. It had been premeditated, almost ritualistic. The young Marine had brought a manual detonator, anticipating the need for a suicide mission. Zalri's hands trembled as he recorded his log entry. His * human combat doctrine incorporates self-sacrifice not as a last resort, but as a standard tactical option. Private Tate's actions aboard the Devourer vessel demonstrate a premeditated willingness to die that exceeds mere courage. The psychological implications are profound and disturbing. Are humans heroes, or monsters? Their capacity for self-destruction as a weapon of war exceeds anything in coalition military history. They have weaponized their own mortality in a way that renders conventional tactical doctrine obsolete. I find myself both repulsed and fascinated. Their approach violates every principle of warfare I have studied, yet achieves results no other species has managed against the Devourer threat. That night, Zalri was awakened by a sound that penetrated even the hull of the Valor, a rhythmic chanting that seemed to emanate from the ship's central gathering space. Drawn by curiosity, he made his way through the dimly lit corridors until he found the source. The ship's company had assembled in the mess hall, standing in formation, at a podium. Captain Laurel Reynolds, a stern-faced woman with silver hair, read from a digital tablet. Chen Myra, Engineer First Class. Present, came the thunderous response from the assembled crew. Diaz Miguel, Navigation Officer. Present. With dawning horror, Zalri realized he was witnessing some form of roll call, but the names being called belonged to the dead. Each name was answered as if the fallen were still among the living. Tate, Aaron, Private. Present. The ritual continued for over an hour, hundreds of names recited and acknowledged. When it finally concluded, Captain Reynolds closed the tablet. They stand with us still, she declared. Their courage lights our path. Their sacrifice fuels our resolve. Tomorrow, we enter battle with their strength added to our own. For Earth and all humanity, the crew responded in unison. Zalri retreated before he could be noticed, his mind struggling to process the implications. The humans weren't simply accepting death, they were incorporating it into their identity, transforming loss into spiritual fuel for further action. The following morning, he received orders to return to Forward Base Delta 7. His observation period was being cut short. Coalition Command wanted his preliminary findings immediately. I request to remain embedded with the assault fleet. Zalri told Hayes when she delivered the recall notice. She studied him with surprise. You've seen enough for an initial assessment. The Coalition needs your expertise to... I have not seen enough. Zalri interrupted. What I've witnessed defies conventional analysis. I need to understand the full scope of human combat doctrine before I can provide meaningful intelligence to Coalition Command. Hayes seemed to consider his words carefully. The Valor is joining the Nexus assault. You understand what that means? Zalri had studied the mission briefings. The Devourer Command Nexus was their central command structure in Nightmare Sector, heavily defended, never successfully breached. The human fleet was mounting a full-scale assault against overwhelming odds. "I understand the probability of survival is minimal," he replied. "And still you want to go?" Hayes searched his face. Why? It was a question Zari had asked himself throughout the night cycle. The rational choice was to return to Delta 7, compile his observations, provide Coalition Command with a detailed analysis of human tactics. Yet something drove him to see this through to its conclusion, a need to comprehend the full measure of humanity's approach to this war. "Because I must know if it works," he said finally. "If the price you pay yields the victory you seek." Hayes was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll amend the orders, but Commander—" Her voice softened slightly. "Once we commit to the Nexus assault, there's no extraction plan. Not until it's over." "I understand." Zalri replied, and he did, perhaps for the first time since his arrival. The human assault fleet assembled on the edge of the Nightmare Sector, a ragtag armada of vessels that should have been decommissioned years ago. 300 ships, from destroyers to converted civilian transports, their hulls streaked with scars and makeshift repairs. Against them stood the Devourer defense grid, biocruisers, neural mines, and the Nexus itself, a massive organic structure that resembled a ganglion of fused spinal columns. From the Valor's tactical center, Zalri observed the final briefing by Admiral Solara, a tall woman with dark skin and eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. "The Nexus controls all Devourer forces in this sector," she explained, highlighting the structure on the holographic display. "Conventional weapons cannot penetrate its outer membranes. Our only option is to insert boarding teams directly into its neural core." The plan unfolded with a simplicity that belied its terrible cost. The fleet would divide into attack waves, sacrificing ships to create breaches in the Devourer defenses. Through those gaps, boarding shuttles would launch, targeting specific nerve clusters within the Nexus. Once inside, Marine teams would plant antimatter charges at critical junctions. Detonation will trigger a cascade failure throughout the Nexus. Admiral Solara concluded, and with it, the collapse of Devourer command and control across the sector. "Casualty projections?" someone asked. The Admiral's face remained impassive. Total. No murmur of dissent followed. No questioning of the strategy. Only nods of acceptance, as if the extinction of 300 ships and their crews was a reasonable price for victory. As the briefing concluded, Zalri approached Admiral Solara. "Your personnel accept these terms without protest," he observed. She regarded him with calm eyes. "Every human aboard these ships volunteered specifically for this mission, Commander Then. They know what awaits them. And you believe this sacrifice is necessary. There is no alternative strategy that preserves your forces." "We've spent 2 years analyzing alternatives." Her voice carried absolute conviction. "This is the only approach with sufficient probability of success. The Nexus must fall, or the Devourers will eventually break through to the core systems." She paused. "Including Earth." "Even at the cost of your entire attack force?" "Especially at that cost." Solara's gaze was steady. "We are a young species, Commander, new to the stars, new to this coalition, but we understand existential mathematics. If our sacrifice buys the survival of our homeworld, the equation balances." The attack commenced 12 hours later. The human fleet accelerated toward the Nexus, formation spreading across a 1,000-kilometer front, too wide for conventional tactics, but serving a purpose Zalri soon recognized. The Devourers could not concentrate their defenses against such a dispersed approach. The first wave of human ships struck the outer defensive perimeter. Many died immediately, torn apart by bioweapons or impaled on the massive organic spines that protected the Nexus. Others deliberately rammed Devourer vessels, creating explosive breaches in the defensive line. Through these gaps surged the second wave, smaller craft designed for speed rather than durability. They too were decimated, but their sacrifice created additional openings for the boarding shuttles that followed. From the Valor's tactical center, Zalri watched the battle unfold with a mixture of horror and awe. The human losses were catastrophic by any military standard, ships vanishing from sensors by the dozens, life signs extinguished in their thousands. Yet their formation never wavered, each vessel pressing forward according to the plan, regardless of the destruction around them. "We're in the final approach," Captain Reynolds announced, her voice steady despite the chaos visible through the viewports. "Boarding teams to shuttles, all other personnel to battle stations." Zalri found himself moving with Lieutenant Cassin's squad toward the launch bay. Although not assigned to the boarding action, he had received permission to observe the final phase from a command shuttle. "You don't have to do this," Hayes told him as they strapped into their seats. "The observational value hardly justifies." "I must see it through." Zalri replied, "For the report to have meaning." The shuttle launched amid a storm of weapons fire. Through the viewport, Zalri watched the Valor engage a Devourer biocruiser, drawing its fire to cover their approach. The human destroyer took devastating damage. Its hull breached in multiple sections, but it continued firing until the shuttle had cleared the engagement zone. Then the Valor was gone, consumed in a ball of plasma as its reactor containment failed. The approach to the Nexus became a gauntlet of fire and organic debris. The shuttle pilot, a young woman with a nameplate reading Diaz, executed maneuvers that seemed to defy the laws of physics, weaving through clouds of neural mines and streams of biological projectiles. "Breach point identified," she called out. "Sealing suits now." The interior of the shuttle pressurized as everyone activated their combat armor. Moments later, a massive impact shook the vessel as it crashed directly into the outer membrane of the Nexus. "Go! Go! Go!" Cassin shouted as the breach doors opened, revealing a nightmare landscape of pulsating tissue and undulating pathways. Zalri found himself moving with the boarding team, recording everything through his suit's systems. The interior of the Nexus dwarfed the bioship they had previously infiltrated. Vast chambers opened into networks of neural pathways. Sealing membranes dripped corrosive fluids that hissed where they struck the deck plates. The team advanced methodically, following a route mapped from fragmented intelligence gathered by previous suicide missions. When resistance appeared, renders and other biological constructs, they dispatched them with practiced efficiency. "Junction point ahead," Cassin announced, consulting a bioscanner. "Primary neural cluster, that's our target." They entered a massive chamber where countless nerve-like structures converged on a central column that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. The neural core, the command center of the entire Nexus. "Set the charges," Cassin ordered. "Overlapping fields. Maximum yield." As the Marines moved to position the antimatter devices, a terrible sound filled the chamber, a subsonic vibration that penetrated even their sealed suits. The walls began to undulate more rapidly, and from recessed cavities emerged new defenders, not renders. But something worse. "Devourers," Hayes whispered. "Actual devourers." They resembled mantis-like insects scaled to human size, with multifaceted eyes and razor-edged limbs. Unlike the bioships and defensive structures, which were engineered weapons, these were the actual architects of the horror, the species that had unleashed this plague on the galaxy. "Continue the mission," Cassin commanded as he raised his weapon. "Charges must be placed." The fighting that followed was brutal and swift. The Devourers moved with horrifying speed, their chitinous armor deflecting standard ammunition. Marines fell one by one, torn apart by razor limbs or impaled on organic spikes that erupted from the chamber floor. Zalri found himself fighting alongside Hayes, using his Vorthon combat training to compensate for the restrictions of the human suit. Together, they held a defensive position that allowed the remaining Marines to place their charges. "Charges set," came the call from across the chamber. 30 seconds to critical mass." "Fall back to the extraction point." Cassin ordered, though everyone present knew extraction was a fiction. Their shuttle was damaged beyond repair. There would be no escape. As they retreated toward the chamber entrance, a Devourer broke through their defensive fire, its razor limbs slashing through Cassin's suit and the body within. The lieutenant collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. "Go!" he gasped to Hayes and Zalri. "Complete the record. Let them know." Hayes dragged Zalri toward the exit as the remaining Marines formed a last defensive line, buying seconds with their lives. The corridor beyond was a straightforward run to the shuttle's breach point, useless as escape, but offering marginally more protection from the imminent antimatter detonation. 20 seconds. Hayes panted as they ran. Maybe the shuttle's hull will shield us long enough to transmit the data. They reached the crashed shuttle just as the deck beneath them began to vibrate with increasing intensity. Hayes slammed a control panel, sealing them inside the vessel's reinforced cockpit. "Transmission ready," she said, linking Zalri's suit recorder to the shuttle's communication array, broadcasting on all Coalition frequencies. Through the viewport, Zalri watched the corridor fill with devourers, their alien forms scuttling toward the shuttle with murderous intent. 10 seconds. 5. For Earth and all humanity, Hayes whispered. The antimatter charges detonated. The explosion tore through the Nexus like a star-going supernova. Neural pathways shattered, biological systems ruptured, and the command structure that had coordinated the Devourer assault on Coalition space for years disintegrated in a cascade of chain reactions. By some miracle of engineering, or perhaps sheer luck, the shuttle's cockpit remained intact long enough for Zalri's data recorder to transmit its contents. Then the pressure wave hit, and darkness claimed him. Zalri awakened in a medical bay, the sterile white surfaces a stark contrast to the organic horror of the Nexus. His body ached with injuries partially healed, suggesting he had been unconscious for some time. "The commander returns to us," said a familiar voice. General Vore stood at the foot of the recovery platform, massive frame somehow diminished since Zalri had last seen him. Beside him stood Admiral Fenn, her Aquilian features unreadable. "The Nexus?" Zalri asked, his voice raspy from disuse. "Destroyed," Vore confirmed, along with 87% of the Devourer forces in Nightmare Sector. The remainder are in disorganized retreat. "The human fleet?" A moment of silence followed. Then Admiral Fenn spoke, her translator struggling to convey the emotion in her harmonics. 17 vessels survived, Commander Then, from an original force of 300. The number struck Zalri like a physical blow. "And Captain Hayes?" "Recovered with you," Vore said. "Though her injuries were extensive, she is still in regeneration." Zalri struggled to sit upright. "My data recordings—" "Received and analyzed," Fenn assured him. "Your observations of human combat tactics have been illuminating. The Coalition Command is eager for your full report." 2 days later, sufficiently recovered to leave the medical bay, Zalri stood before the Coalition War Council aboard Forward Base Delta 7. His formal uniform felt too tight across his healing carapace, but protocol demanded proper attire for such a briefing. The council chamber had been reconfigured since his departure. The hollow table now displayed not Nightmare Sector, but the broader galactic theater. The red markers indicating Devourer forces had receded significantly, while Coalition Blue had expanded into previously contested regions. "Commander Then," General Vore began, "you were assigned to observe and report on human military tactics. Your findings are now a matter of urgent strategic importance." Zalri approached the podium, aware of the weight of the moment. Representatives from every Coalition species watched with varying degrees of interest and wariness. "My findings can be summarized in a single tactical assessment." He began. "Humanity has weaponized its own death wish." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. "Elaborate," Admiral Fenn requested. "Human military doctrine incorporates self-sacrifice not as a last resort, but as a primary tactical option." Zalri continued. "They volunteer for suicide missions, design attacks that ensure their own destruction, and celebrate fallen comrades as present forces in ongoing operations." He activated the holotable, displaying footage from his recordings, the naming ritual aboard the Valor, Private Tate's last stand, the Nexus assault with its overwhelming casualties. Their approach violates conventional military logic, which prioritizes force preservation and strategic withdrawal when losses become untenable. Instead, humans embrace losses as an acceptable, even expected component of victory. "A species with a death wish can hardly be considered a reliable ally," objected a Medusan representative. "Not a death wish," Zalri corrected. "A willingness to die for specific objectives. There is a crucial distinction. Humans do not seek death, they simply accept it as a reasonable price for victory." And this makes them effective against the Devourers. General Vore noted, extraordinarily so. Zalri confirmed. The Devourers evolved their tactics against species that value self-preservation. Their strategies assume opponents will retreat when losses become severe. Humans never retreat. They advance until they win or until they are extinct, with no middle ground. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Then a Calarian general spoke, mandibles clicking with agitation. Are you suggesting we adopt human tactics, Commander? That the Coalition embrace suicide missions as standard procedure? I am suggesting no such thing. Zalri replied carefully. Most Coalition species are psychologically incapable of adopting the human approach. Our neural structures, our evolutionary imperatives, our cultural foundations, all prioritize survival. Then what is your recommendation? Admiral Fenn pressed. Zalri paused, knowing his next words would shape Coalition strategy for years to come. Arm the humans, fund them, direct them toward the most critical Devourer strongholds, and then stand aside. The statement landed like a thermal charge in the chamber. Protests erupted from multiple representatives, ethical objections mingling with strategic concerns. You would have us use them as weapons? A Galvadi ambassador demanded, wings flaring with indignation. Expend them like ammunition? They have already chosen this path, Zalri replied steadily. I merely suggest we acknowledge their decision and incorporate it into Coalition strategy. The debate raged for hours. Ethical concerns clashed with military necessity. The specter of species extinction battled with moral principles. Through it all, Zalri stood firm in his assessment. Humanity had introduced a new element to the war, a species willing to trade its own extinction for victory. In the end, a compromise was reached. The Coalition would provide humans with advanced technology and weapons. They would be assigned to critical offensives where conventional tactics had failed. But safeguards would be implemented: casualty thresholds, withdrawal protocols, preservation of core forces. Zalri knew, even as the Council voted to approve these measures, that the humans would ignore such restrictions. They would continue to fight as they had at the Nexus, with total commitment and acceptance of the ultimate price. His final report to Coalition Command included a warning. Humanity represents both our greatest hope against the Devourer threat and a profound ethical challenge to Coalition principles. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves en masse achieves results no other approach has managed. Yet in embracing their methods, we risk becoming something other than what we set out to preserve. The question we must answer is not whether human tactics work, they demonstrably do, but whether victory achieved through such means is victory at all. 5 years later, Zalri stood on the soil of Earth for the first time. The war had turned decisively after the Nexus assault. Devourer forces, deprived of centralized command and faced with an enemy that would not retreat regardless of losses, had gradually been pushed back beyond Coalition space. The cost had been staggering. Of the original human fleet that had joined the Coalition, less than 20% remained. Entire ship companies had been expended in suicide runs against Devourer strongholds. Boarding actions had claimed thousands of Marines, yet humanity had prevailed, and with them, the Coalition. The memorial gardens stretched before him, a vast expanse of monuments and quiet reflection pools, names carved in stone and etched in crystal, millions of them, each representing a life given in the war effort. At the center stood a simple obelisk inscribed with the words, "They stand with us still." Captain Hayes, now Admiral Hayes, walked beside him, her uniform adorned with commendations. The regeneration treatments had restored most of her physical capabilities, though she still walked with a slight limp. "You warned the Coalition what working with us would mean," she said as they moved among the memorials. "Did you ever regret your recommendation?" Zalri considered the question carefully. The alternative was extinction. The Devourers would have consumed us all, world by world. Your approach achieved what a decade of conventional warfare could not. "That wasn't my question," Hayes pressed gently. "I regret the necessity," Zalri admitted, "but not the decision." They paused before a wall listing the crews of ships lost in the Nexus assault. Among them, the UES Valor, Captain Reynolds, Lieutenant Casson, Private Tate, hundreds more. The Coalition species still don't understand us. Hayes said after a moment of silence. They see our willingness to sacrifice as something alien, incomprehensible. Perhaps it is. Zalri replied, My own people fight fiercely, but always with the expectation of survival. Your acceptance of death as a tactical option remains unsettling. Hayes smiled faintly. It wasn't acceptance of death, Commander. It was refusal to accept defeat. There's a difference. As they continued through the memorial, Zalri observed groups of human children being guided by veterans, listening to stories of the war. Not tales of individual heroism, he noted, but accounts of collective sacrifice, how entire ship companies had volunteered for missions from which they would not return. The children listened with solemn attention, occasionally placing small tokens at the base of monuments, not flowers or traditional remembrances, but objects representing commitments, model ships, uniform insignia, fragments of poetry. You teach them to remember, Zalri observed. We teach them to be present. Hayes corrected. In our naming ritual, we don't speak of the dead as lost. They are with us still, their courage part of our own. The concept remained foreign to Zalri's understanding, yet he could not deny its power. Humanity had forged a weapon more deadly than any Devourer biocruiser, a willingness to pay the ultimate price not as individuals, but as an entire species if necessary. In his final report to the Vorthon Republic, classified at the highest level, Zalri had written, Humanity entered the conflict facing the same existential threat as all Coalition species. What distinguished them was not superior technology or numbers, but a psychological framework that transformed individual mortality into collective strength. When extinction threatens, most species fight desperately to survive. Humans fight differently. They ensure their enemy's destruction even if it means their own. This approach defies conventional military logic, yet achieves results no other methodology has managed against the Devourer threat. The Coalition now faces a profound question. In the peace that follows victory, what place exists for a species that weaponized its own extinction? Having unleashed humanity against our common enemy, can we now ask them to return to conventional approaches? Or has the war fundamentally altered not only them, but us as well? Perhaps most disturbing is the realization that, in our desperate hour, we needed their madness. Without humanity's willingness to sacrifice everything, the Coalition might well have fallen. We now live because they were willing to die. The human spirit remains the most terrible weapon I have encountered in my military career, and the most necessary. As Zalri and Hayes reached the end of the memorial walkway, they paused before a final monument. A representation of the Nexus, shattering into fragments, with the names of all who had participated in the assault spiraling around it in an endless ribbon. Would you do it again? Zalri asked quietly, knowing the cost. Hayes didn't hesitate. Every time, for Earth and all humanity. She glanced at him. Wouldn't your people do the same? Zalri wanted to affirm that they would. That any species would make the same choice when survival hung in the balance. But the truth was more complex. The Vorthon Republic, like most Coalition species, had fought the war with the assumption that victory required survival. Humanity alone had separated those concepts, embracing victory even at the cost of extinction. I don't know, he admitted finally. And that is perhaps the fundamental difference between our peoples. Hayes nodded, understanding in her eyes. It's why we won, Commander. Not because we're braver or stronger or more skilled, but because when facing an enemy that consumes all life, we were willing to become the one thing they couldn't devour. What is that? A weapon that destroys itself to destroy its target. She smiled sadly. Perfect symmetry. As they turned to leave the memorial, Zalri glimpsed a group of human children placing their hands on the monument, reciting names in the ritual he had first witnessed aboard the Valor. Present, not past. Living, not dead. a continuation rather than an ending. In that moment, he understood that humanity had not merely survived the war, they had transformed it into their legacy. The fallen were not lost, but incorporated into the collective identity, their sacrifice a foundation for whatever came next. They had weaponized not just their willingness to die, but their determination to ensure that such deaths had meaning. And in doing so, they had achieved what no coalition strategist had thought possible: victory against an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. Zalri made one final note in his personal log that evening. Asterisk, we unleashed a weapon more deadly than any Devourer biocruiser. The human spirit. May we never need to deploy it again, and may we never forget what it cost them to save us all.